Hi, everybody. Where have all the corporate apartments gone? That's the question that we're going to explore today. Average monthly rents in the US domestically are over $1,500 per month. National occupancies have reached 96.5%. That's the highest it's been in 20 plus years. And rents just in the first half of 2021 are up 9.6%. Those are incredible, staggering numbers. So what we want to do today with you is we want to break down the current state of the service department, corporate apartment industry, and we want to share a little bit with you, with each other, about how we're going to ensure that our transferring employees are going to have safe, secure, comfortable, and most importantly, available places to stay throughout the rest of 2021 and beyond. The pent-up demand is erupting. We've all heard it. We're all seeing it. We're all starting to see it happen. And it's not just in the corporate housing and global mobility spaces. It's everything. For instance, if you're looking for a new or used car, I mean, good luck. There's no availability. You're not going to find one. And if you do, the price is going to be much higher than what you would have paid even 12 months ago, much less 2 years ago. If you're traveling, if you're finally getting to get out and travel and you're looking for a rental car, the prices on rental cars on average are up over 200%. And that's if you can find one. Most cases in most large areas where people are starting to take a little bit of holiday vacation time, you can't even find one. And if you're buying furniture, this is pretty crazy. I ordered a new sofa on the website. When you went to hit order, it said it would take almost 22 months for this sofa to arrive. So it's crazy what's going on out in the marketplace. And let's don't even get into home sale prices, right? If you're buying a house right now, you're seeing people offering over ask. I read an article the other day about a house in Austin. Someone offered $1 million over the ask price, and the offers are coming in with no contingencies, no inspections, no appraisals, cash offers, and that's if you can be the person who wins, because you most likely will lose out to another bidder on the first 2, 3, 4, 5 homes that you're looking at. Actually, according to Zillow, U.S. homes appreciated 15% in June 2021 alone. So let that sink in for a second. What does all that mean? It means that more people are moving into apartments than ever. And there's a lot of components of this that are playing into the fact that there is some changes, some differences that are in the apartment industry than we've ever experienced before. First and foremost, you have to think about, we've got 3 generations of folks who are living in apartments nowadays, according to the National Apartment Association. We've got Gen Z folks. They all moved home and stayed with mom and dad throughout the pandemic. They're out looking for apartments now to get back out on their own. We've got these very mobile millennials that have the ability now with many employers to do the work from anywhere situation. And what they're doing is moving to lower cost cities where they can rent apartments for much less than they might, for instance, on one of the coasts. And then you've got baby boomers who are moving into the rental market for a different reason. Now it's a seller's market for homes. They can actually sell their homes for more money. So they're doing so earlier than they might have done historically, and they're downsizing into rentals. So what does all that mean for us in the global mobility industry and the corporate housing industry? It means less availability and higher prices. It's just as simple as supply and demand. Corporate housing caps throughout all of this have been lowered. We all in this industry decreased our inventory as we held out and sustained ourselves throughout the pandemic, and now we're building those inventories back up over the last 12 months. But it means that there's so much more demand, both from us in the corporate housing industry, as well as from all the other components I've just mentioned, and it's pushing things into a new and different environment for us. So what are we going to do now that you take all of that and you add to it the erupting business from travel and global relocations beginning again? So I ask again, where have all the corporate apartments gone? We're going to dig in today in the conversation, and we're going to illuminate the realities of the current supply environment. We're going to dispel some really sort of faulty narratives that have developed over the last few months. We're going to talk about the increase in rates and the why behind it and how we can all navigate all of this together. We're going to find all the puzzle pieces and we're going to put them together for how we emerge from the pandemic with the most success possible. I'd like to introduce you guys to Eileen MacDonald. She's the Global Mobility Partner from Thermo Fisher Scientific, and she's going to turn the table today on Joan Mack, who is Synergy's VP of Global Supply Chain, and me, and she's going to ask us the burning questions that have to do with corporate clients and their questions about corporate housing as we emerge from the pandemic. So I'd like to start, Eileen, if you would just give us a little bit of an understanding of where you all sit at Thermo Fisher Scientific with respect to corporate housing in this environment.
That's right. As Craig mentioned, I am with Thermo Fisher Scientific. We are in the life sciences arena, and we consider a world leader in serving science. Our goal is to have our customers be able to make the world a healthier, cleaner, and safer place to be. Myself, along with 85,000 other colleagues worldwide, work to provide innovative technology through our various brands. And global mobility sits within the human resources group. And our group manages both domestic and global relocations, as well as international assignments. So as I mentioned, Thermo Fisher was in an interesting situation from the standpoint that we were still continuing to move people, even though our numbers were down. And when I look at what was happening with temporary housing within our relocating population, I did see that the rents were definitely up and inventory was much tighter, even in larger markets where I had not seen it be tight in the past. So just curious, Joan, what are you seeing behind the scenes in terms of inventory and rents within the industry?
Yes, thank you, Eileen. Well, first of all, you've hit the nail on the head. The US has officially entered into the post-pandemic period of reemergence and recovery. And what we're seeing is that we have the perfect storm. So as Craig outlined in his opening remarks, it's an unprecedented real estate market right now. And at the same time, landlords and multifamily companies were hit pretty hard with the pandemic. They had interrupted cash flow. They were facing additional legal costs because of evictions they needed to make. Suppliers were bailing on inventory and somewhat panicking throughout the pandemic. So today, in terms of inventory that is available, Craig mentioned we are seeing lower corporate caps. Some of these property owners and landlords are very skittish now to work with our industry. Those that didn't pay their rents have definitely added to some of the challenges in the market with regard to inventory. So you take this real estate market that we're currently in, which is unprecedented. I believe Craig mentioned that a median apartment rent rose 9.6% for the first 6 months of 2021. And also we're seeing real estate appreciation, which hasn't been like this since 1996. So what's happening is that in some of the large markets, we're seeing some cities 20 to 50% higher with base rents, less inventory that is being put out into the market, into the industry of short-term rental. Many landlords flipped over their inventory to long-term so that they didn't have to deal with the risk. So as I said, it's kind of the perfect storm. We have a real estate market that is leaving people in their rental homes longer than they need to be because they can't afford to buy a home. We have people who are already in corporate housing, but their home might not be ready because of lumber challenges. Maybe they're building a new home and they can't get materials. So they're staying in their corporate rental longer, locking out those that would have taken that inventory. So there's lots of different external challenges that are happening today. Border closures, quarantines, government restrictions have all slowed some of the items like furniture, which are necessary to put into a rental apartment if you can find a rental apartment. So all of these challenges are really posing an opportunity to the corporate housing market, but at the same time, we're seeing extreme rises in base rents. And so, for example, some of the cities where we are seeing some extraordinary increases, Austin, Texas, for example, a number of companies are relocating to Austin out of California. There is huge movement in Austin. And this is kind of staggering, but just 6 weeks ago, a rental that was $2,400 a month is now $4,800 a month. And those costs for taking out new apartments have to be passed on to our clients. San Jose, Seattle, San Diego, New York, Boston are a couple of the other key hot cities where we're seeing extraordinary increases in rental rates. So, you know, again, I don't want to sound like this is all doom and gloom, because there's certainly lots of opportunities here for us to come up with solutions for our clients. But basically what we're dealing with is an environment of compression upon compression upon compression. So the two things that you just mentioned, Eileen, rates are increasing, and there's not that there's no availability of property or apartments, it's just that it's very challenging now in this market to secure them.
Thanks so much for providing some of that background, Joan. Thermo Fisher's RMCs have already brought us up to speed on the challenges the industry is facing in terms of how the pandemic and the downstream effects are affecting individual relocations. So we're talking about things like household goods, labor shortages, lack of availability for temporary living, delays in setting up utilities. Joan, starting with you, from your perspective, how is Synergy advising their clients to stay in front of the supply shortages and to be able to best work with their RMCs and their individual providers?
Sure, Eileen. Yes, we have a whole list of things that we are mentioning to our clients that would help us through this challenging time. So first of all is make decisions as soon as possible. So if a client knows that they are going to have travelers who are going to be relocating or moving and needing temporary housing, please let your supplier know as soon as possible. Having this information right now in this market is critical. If at all possible, stagger moves. As we know, sort of the freight train is coming down the tracks at 150 miles an hour, and everyone is moving at the same time. So if there's any way to move out of the summer season and extend the season into the fall, into November and December, that would be very helpful. Also, too, being flexible about the type of property, the location. Again, lots of times people wanted a location that's within a certain mile radius from work. And again, maybe that apartment's not available, but there's something similar a little bit further away. So being flexible about property type, where the location is, and also the rate. The other thing that we are advising clients is that, of course, with everything I just discussed in terms of the rental market, rates are skyrocketing. So being able to have that information so that clients can adjust their budgets accordingly to accept sort of this new environment that we're all in. So expanding the radius around what's acceptable for temp housing. Also, too, consider creating hybrid programs where travelers may go into hotels or extended stays in addition to temporary housing and apartments. Also, be willing to pre-procure inventory for larger group moves. Set expectations internally with the traveler that someone who may have traveled before pre-pandemic, having them be aware of all of these changes in terms of the types of inventory solutions that may be out there. And lastly, be flexible. Be flexible and communicate. Communicate with your partners, communicate with your suppliers. Having transparency and open dialogue really will put our clients in a better space in order to secure what they're looking for and be able to move their travelers as best they can.
I think that it's fantastic advice, Joan. And if I could speak to it from sort of the salesperson's perspective, there's a lot that can happen in the sort of triangular partnership between the RMC, the client, and then the various service providers. In this scenario, of course, the corporate housing provider. But we're conducting benchmarking surveys with clients and making suggestions to both the RMC and the client of things like doing an automatic booking scenario, especially in those really, really high volume markets like Northern California. Set up a number of properties that these are approved for this particular client, and therefore when the request comes across, they're automatically booked into an apartment. Then you don't have any of that downtime that typically would happen between the options being sent back and forth. Because I think in the next few months, options will probably not be an option, if you will.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That is another suggestion as well, is that when options are presented, it used to be that multiple options would be part of the portfolio of for a customer to select. And so today I would highly advise that take the option that is presented, because if you wait 2 or 3 days to secure that, it's not going to be there.
So Craig, along those lines, are there any misconceptions or falsehoods that you are noticing that are coming up from customers that you are aware of that are kind of misleading buyers about availability and kind of what the state of inventory is within the temporary housing industry?
Absolutely, and it's an excellent question for us to discuss. A few months ago, every discussion was about capacity planning. So it was going out to your providers and finding out, whether it's your household goods provider, your corporate housing provider, but saying, what is your capacity if we're going to have a very large number of people move at the same time? What happened in the corporate housing space is that, and I'll give an actual example that happened with us. We had a client who splits their business amongst multiple corporate housing providers. They went out to each of those providers and said, go into the Seattle market and tell us what is the capacity that you would have to handle moves going into Seattle. So given that during COVID, all the corporate housing providers really decreased their inventories in order to sustain while we weren't getting any moves, now we have to build back up. So we're all going out to communities and saying, how many apartments do you have available for us to be able to take as corporate apartments? What happened in this scenario was all 5 providers went out to all the properties in that particular Seattle market and said, how many apartments are available? 1,000. They all went back to the client and said, I've got 1,000 apartments available in the Seattle market. The client took from that, and understandably so, took from that to mean there's 5,000 available apartments in that market. That's false, unfortunately, right? Because as we're all ramping up, we're going out to the same properties in many cases, at least some of them overlap, if not all, and it's 1,000 apartments available in that market. So that's just one example of sort of the false narratives that are in the marketplace right now that I think all of us working in partnership and in conjunction with each other can make sure that we solve too.
Absolutely. Craig, if I could chime in as well. The other thing that is a myth is that people feel that there is a sort of, they haven't kind of equated that this inventory is very tight. So they're thinking it's post-pandemic, that there's all this unoccupied inventory that's out there and that they should be able to get it at really discounted rates. When the reality is that, as I mentioned, the complete opposite has happened. And I don't know that any of us anticipated this when we were going through COVID. I think that's part of the whole issue here, is that it's so unknown, in terms of what we're all dealing with. Who knows what it's going to be like by the end of the summer, whether there will be more occupancy and more apartments available, or whether everything will be completely sold out.
So Joan, as you know, Thermo Fisher has a really big global presence. So I'm curious if you could speak a little bit to how these inventory and pricing issues are playing out internationally. And is it changing as EMEA and APAC are opening up, or depending on how you look at it, with the Delta variant closing back down?
Yes, yeah, a tale of two worlds, right? So absolutely. So as I mentioned, the US was much quicker to rebound than EMEA and APAC because of the immunization rollout. However, now what we are starting to see is demand is significantly increasing in EMEA. We're seeing large movements into the major cities, the key cities, London, Dublin, Paris, Zurich. And what's happening is that as this demand is rolling out, it's the height of summer holiday season in EMEA. So a lot of the inventory that we're now looking for, and this is true also in the US, is that we're seeing more requests for much larger apartment sizes, 2 and 3 bedroom apartments, as opposed to the standard 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom. And it's because people are looking for obviously more space. They now want an office in their apartment. Work from home has become part of the norm since the pandemic. So people do want this extra space. They might be bringing their family along with them. And that same inventory of 2 to 3 bedrooms is typically held by private landlords in EMEA. They don't have the same model that we have over here in the US, where there's large multifamily, large property with 5 or 6 stories of apartments in a building. It tends to be private landlords. And those private landlords are coming through with these 2 and 3 bedroom larger units. But what's happening is, like I said, it's butting up against the holiday season. Families are taking these units now because they were cooped up during COVID. They were not able to move. And now they still can't move outside of their country in many cases because of the government regulations and border closings, and still have some restrictions. So what they're doing is they're doing these staycations, and they're using the same inventory. They're booking the same inventory that we are looking for to expand our portfolio. So again, another perfect storm. Rates are rising, and inventory in EMEA, in those large cities, is becoming a challenge. APAC, on the other hand, is still slow to open. The Singapore borders are still closed. Many of the government restrictions are still in place within China and some of the other countries. So again, it is a different model in Asia. It's an apart hotel model where buildings are already on the ground, they're already developed. So I don't know that we're going to see as big a challenge in the APAC market, but definitely we are seeing the same challenges that we're seeing in the US, just a little bit more delayed compared to here in our country. So despite all of the challenges that we're talking about today, I think what's really important to point out is that our clients still depend on us to develop solutions and to come up with innovative ideas to address many of these challenges that they're dealing with.
And you know what, really good point, Joan, if I can just interject. We have to solve, right? And I think that that's our challenge in this time that you just described as an opportunity. From a benchmarking perspective, again, as I mentioned earlier, one thing that we have clients that we have suggested to them are turnkey apartments. A turnkey apartment being you take on one apartment or a group of apartments, and then we assist you, the corporate client or the RMC, with transitioning multiple guests throughout a longer term lease. There's a lot of things that solves. Gives you guaranteed availability of apartments because it's yours for whatever period you sign a lease for, and then also allows you to utilize it for a multitude of uses. Could be for relocation, could be for quarantine scenarios. And then we, as the corporate housing service department provider, are helping you in managing that entire process. So we got this. We're going to figure this out. But Eileen, I'm interested to know, because Thermo Fisher didn't stop moving as much, I should say, during COVID. Give us an idea of what you've seen in the international markets, because I have a guess it might be a little bit different.
You're right, Craig. It was a little bit different from the standpoint that the governments worldwide, especially in Europe, kind of made the decision for us about the ability to have people move. Since a lot of the borders were still closed, a lot of people didn't have the option to move, and we had to put their moves on hold. So during when everything was still locked down, we really weren't seeing the same kinds of availability issues that we are starting to see now. Fortunately, in the immediate period, Joan mentioned people being on holiday in Europe. That has worked in our favor to a certain degree, because people want to wait until after their holidays before they make a move with their families. But then the flip side of that is they're utilizing our apartments for their holidays.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a vicious little circle, but we did get some help from the local governments in that way, because it did limit the number of moves that we were able to do, especially during the height of COVID. So Joan, as we've been going through these inventory restrictions, I'm curious what kind of concerns and advice that you have for people that are buying the apartments and buying the units. What kind of pressure are they getting to sign off on alternate housing? And I'm talking about things like extended stay hotels and VRBO and Airbnb and those types of kind of non-standard, out of the box thinking. I'm trying to weigh we need to find a solution with what makes the most sense for the company and for the transferring employee.
Yeah, Eileen, that's a fantastic question, because those types of inventory solutions are out there. Alternative accommodations through Airbnb or VRBO, or private landlords, as I mentioned, like what's going on in EMEA. What happens with those is that there is not a standardized vetting process. And we all know that in this industry, it is really critical to make sure that we have consistent standards in whatever type of accommodation that we are placing our traveler into, around safety, security, cleanliness, COVID standards, now social distancing, ensuring that our duty of care, if you will, that there is always an umbrella of duty of care, taking care of the guest from the moment they leave their own home and arrive back throughout their temporary stay. So what we see is that, yes, some of these look like very good options. We do have some clients that are signing off on their travelers using those types of options, but I actually have a really good example. We were working with a very high-end VIP who traditional temporary housing wasn't going to work for. And I actually happened to be in the city where he and his family were looking at Airbnbs as an option. And his budget was $25,000 a month. And I went out and looked at 3 properties. Now, this was a family that had small children, I believe 3 children under the age of 6. And while they were beautiful properties, I couldn't pass them on. I actually did the vetting myself. I couldn't pass them on to be offered as options, because in all 3 properties, there were pools, and the pools were not gated and they were not fenced in. And one property was right on the ocean, and the kids could have, as a mom myself, I wouldn't feel safe in those properties, even though they were absolutely beautiful and had the space that the customer and the guest would have loved to be in. So I think there is a real balance between how we vet these accommodations. Today, there are virtual tools. We actually here at Synergy have an apartment inspection tool that we can use virtually. There are videos, but not everything comes through in a video. You really do need to be on site at the property to ensure that all of those safety and security standards are there. So my comment around this to our clients is, yes, it's a kind of use at your own risk, but I do know that we run into challenges. Eileen, I'm sure that you're getting some of your travelers who are saying, well, can you sign off? Can I stay in, this VRBO that I found? It's perfect for my family. How are you actually handling that as a client?
So we're working with our RMCs to make sure people understand that there is a risk involved here, because they are going outside the program through no fault of their own, but it's still outside the program. And we are taking things at face value. Everybody has heard the horror stories of the Airbnbs and the VRBOs, that it was nothing like the pictures. It was nothing like they said it was. And at that point, what are you going to do if you have a family with a dog and a cat and children that now have nowhere to stay? So we have really been trying to work with our RMCs of what's our plan A, what's our plan B, what if availability isn't there for the entire length of time that they need to be in temp housing, where are we going to put them from there? Really play out the scenarios a lot further than what we would have in the past. We would have been like, oh, they're going into a corporate apartment, they're there for 60 days, and that's the end of it. There was no need to do a plan B. But now, if the employee is saying, I need to be in a particular school district, and I've got this dog that nobody will let live in an apartment, we may not have a choice. So in a lot of those situations, we're really counseling towards, these are the things you need to look at. Do we have somebody at the local office that can go do a drive-by and make sure that the place actually exists? Is there any way that we can go in and do a walkthrough like what you did? So any of those preventive things and proactive things that we could do to give whatever set of comfort that we could to myself and to the employee, to make sure that none of us are sitting up on check-in day going, I hope to God there is a property there. I hope to God the keys are there. I hope the place is clean. I hope the place is exactly like the pictures. To avoid some of that additional stress. Everybody knows there's stress that goes along with relocation. You don't need to add any more. So whatever you can do to kind of help ease some of that stress, I think is worth the extra effort.
Yes, absolutely. It is definitely a challenging question, because there's so much risk at stake, and yet many of the units are great options and are alternative solutions. It's just finding that really delicate balance, and not just, God forbid, something serious happens in one of them, but even just minor areas like, okay, my washer and dryer aren't working, the utilities aren't turned on, my TV remote isn't working. How do I connect with maintenance? Again, a lot of these properties are individual landlords or just an individual family who's renting out their home, and they're not on site and they're not there to be able to help. So again, we pride ourselves, we want everyone to have a stellar customer experience. And I don't know that always happens in these alternative solutions, but it is something that the industry is definitely looking at. And there are, like I said, we don't want to just present all of the negative things that are out there. There are potential solutions. We're looking at, with Synergy, we're looking at the super hosts that own a number of apartments and properties throughout the world, and finding out whether or not we can work with them so that they will take our standardized vetting program and apply it to what they're doing. And then we would feel a lot more comfortable offering those solutions to some of our clients and guests.
Well, from a client perspective, just finding the Airbnb or VRBO or alternate housing is just the first step. Then you're looking at things like, how do we pay for this? How's billing work? What kind of fees are we going to put into place in order to make this happen? What happens if they get injured? Or what happens if there's damage to the property because you have children or a dog? And then the kind of umbrella liability of, while the employee picked it, we paid for it at the end of the day. So those are all concerns from a corporate perspective that have to be addressed in some way, shape, or form in order to kind of cover all your bases in utilizing alternate housing.
Exactly. Couldn't have said it better.
So Craig, I'm kind of curious from a client perspective, what do you need from us? Because from my side, our needs have not changed. So we're still asking for the same thing. We want apartments available when we need them for as long as we need them, and we want them to be perfect in every way, shape, or form. And so what is it that you need from us in order to help fulfill our requirements?
It's really a great question in the sense that we've painted a kind of a bleak picture as an industry of all of the reasons why it's going to be difficult to get housing. We are going to be able to get housing. We are going to be able to supply it. It's just going to be probably supplied in a different way and in a different timing than it has been historically. So, you know, we call it the 3 Ps: plan, prioritize, and procure. So the conversations and the collaboration that might have happened pre-COVID on a monthly basis about forecasting needs to happen on a weekly basis, sometimes more than every week, so that we can understand with how quickly things are changing, you know, who is coming, whose orders have gotten stopped and now they're not coming, so that we can then go out and procure inventory at the right time, at the right place, right size apartments, and all of that. I think that flexibility is going to be huge. And that's the things that you and Joan were just discussing about alternative types of housing. But that flexibility, even if person A moves out of an apartment and person B needs to move in and there's a bit of an overlap, perhaps we're putting person B into a hotel for a few days in order to give the bridge so that we can clean the apartment adequately, make sure that we have enough time to get it, you know, customer ready so that you're getting a perfect apartment when it arrives. I think being open to the circles of areas that work for that particular office site for employees to live in, going a little larger on those. And there's an interesting component with that, in that we're seeing that everyone who used to come in and only want to live within 5 minutes, for instance, of the office, now because they're on these hybrid work scenarios, they're okay with living a little bit further out. So sometimes the client isn't as aware of that. And we've shared that back from a benchmarking perspective to let clients understand your people actually do want to live a little further away. So that opens up more opportunities for more apartments. So I think also understanding as we come out of this isn't forever. And this is not a synergy issue or any other singular corporate housing provider issue. This is a market condition issue. And all the reasons that we've talked about earlier in the conversation that have played into this are going to settle out. The biggest being construction of new properties, right? Once the shortages of the natural resources that are needed and the labor that are needed sort of normalize, then we're going to be able to have more apartments being built and brought into the marketplace like we normally would. I think that's going to happen also with the housing markets. And then I think that the staggering thing that we've mentioned, staggering your move-ins, may actually happen naturally because of the slowness with some of the other parts of the industry, right? Household goods industry, I know, is having some challenges with having enough capacity as far as just the number of trucks, fuel, you know, smaller labor pool for drivers. So I think some of that's going to also sort of lengthen the amount of time that this demand that's coming, what we think in an avalanche, is probably going to be spread out a little bit further.
Well, and I think too, from a client perspective, we talked about a couple things with Joan previously about the need for some flexibility. But I think we as clients could also work a little more collaboratively with the RMCs to better line up our housing, so that if we know there's a possibility for a group move, we can start to look at availability even before we have all the concrete details. And along the lines of flexibility as well, looking at, you know, this, whereas before you could hem and haw about what the options were. You were going to get
Right.
2 or 3 options that are available in the area. You could think about it for a couple of days and then go back to your RMC and say, hey, I'll take this one. That type of flexibility isn't there anymore. So preparing our transferees to be able to make quick decisions and explaining why, I think would go a long way to help with that as well. There's no clear-cut winner in this. Everybody's going to have to give a little bit, whether it's the client or the transferee or you guys within the industry. So I think if everybody gives a little bit, it'll make things a little bit easier. None of this is going to be easy for anybody. But I think that's going to be the key, is working together to make the best out of a bleak situation.
I agree with you 100%. And I think the thing that stands out to me the most that you just mentioned is the collaboration amongst all of us. We've always been a collaborative industry and working together. But I think that this particular period in our time of history for relocation and mobility is going to be more important than ever, that it happens more often, more clearly, with changes being communicated back and forth very quickly. I think that we will all survive this. This will not be forever. This will be a short blip in time that we will hopefully look back maybe in the middle of 2022 and say, hey, that was an interesting time to be in this industry, but we made it. We're on the other side, and then we're back to business as normal. There will be some things though that are changed forever, and I think some of that will be the flexibility that you mentioned. I think that what I really hope for us is that the collaboration that happens more quickly and more succinctly and more often will be something that stays with us, that'll help transferees get more comfortable more quickly and be able to be acclimated where they're moving to and be able to get back to work at places like Thermo Fisher Scientific.
You know, I just want to jump into, Craig. I think that both of you really hit the nail on the head in terms of, you know, having those open, honest, transparent conversations, right, between supplier and client. Especially, you know, identifying, you know, not being afraid to identify the red flags and all the things that are the negatives, right? Because that's the only way that we're going to solve for the problem. One of the great things that's gone on in our industry during COVID is that there has been a lot of innovation. There are a number of companies who have been working on technology, of our comrades, if you will, our friends in this industry, have been working on technology solutions, different ways of handling the guest interaction, and those things are here to stay. So, you know, I think the saying, necessity is the mother of invention, is what really happened during COVID. And to Craig's point, we're going to see a lot of new ideas and creative innovation as we move into the future. So it isn't just a bleak outlook. I think it's a very positive outlook for our industry.
Absolutely great point, Joan and Eileen. I want to thank you guys for joining me in this conversation today. I was taking notes as you guys were talking throughout, and I just sort of summarized. So I thought we would share with everybody. I think, and you guys feel free to add in any final thoughts that you have, but I think if we net this out, first and foremost, we all need patience as we go through this. And that's patience for RMCs, for clients, for vendor providers like Synergy, but also for the transferees, right? And part of that's going to happen, I think, if we set realistic expectations for the transferees that this is not the norm. Transferees, especially if they've been relocated multiple times, probably will have a very different experience this time, not in the quality, but just in probably the process. I think that the flexibility will apply, as we've mentioned throughout the conversation, to everything from pricing, locations, the type of housing, the apartment size. I think we've got to have flexibility when it comes to all of those features. And I think that quick decisions that come from really large conversations about planning, and planning that used to be a week, you know, it could be a day, right? So, but we need to have conversations, collaborate throughout all this. And again, I'll end with what I started with, which is a lot of patience. So we will get through this, we will get to the other side, and we will all prevail.